It's the end of the year, and I've been tidying up a bit, making space, clearing out some stuff I might never use, including some lists of ideas that I would like to release into the wild. So yeah, a little bit of a low-effort video today because I'm still feeling a bit poorly, and rather than just show you loads of text on screen that says the same words as I'm trying to speak, I'm just going to fill the visual gaps with random, unrelated, possibly unused footage collected over the last year. The first idea from my list is actually a video about the power of lists, which I suppose is what I'm going to talk about as a preface to the rest of the video here. I have these lists of ideas that I keep writing, because in general, every time I complete a previous idea, it sparks off at least 2 more new ideas, sort of like nuclear fission or the myth of Hercules and the Hydra. In order to stay relatively sane and functional, I just write down all the new ideas in lists, just a few words of description in a list, in a text document or notebook somewhere, and this has a few benefits. Firstly, once I know something is on the list, I know I can stop thinking about it. I can stop trying to remember it, and I can make space in my head for whatever I'm supposed to be currently working on, or want to be working on. Nextly, I am never bored. If I find myself with some spare time and no plans, I can just browse the list of ideas until I either find one that looks like it fits the amount of time I have to spare, or at least looks like I could begin in that time, and start working on it or developing it or playing with it. Finally, but similarly, I am never worried about running out of ideas. Every completed project contains the seeds of ideas for other projects, perhaps related or inspired. Sometimes the links are so tenuous that they seem almost random, and sometimes the only link is that the course of the current project took me within proximity of something else to wonder about. The lists only ever get longer. This is normal, and I can't make them shorter by completing items on the lists because of that fission thing that I already mentioned. Thus, my life's work will become mathematically less complete in the future than it is right now. This is fine, really. Anyway, here's an assortment of ideas on different themes which you're free to leave, scorn or scoff at, or take and use, modify, rethink, redevelop, or just discard. If you do use them, you're not in any way obliged to mention or credit me if you don't want to. Letter life. First idea is based on something already well established, which I might need to quickly explain for people who don't already know it. Conway's Game of Life is a fairly simple algorithm, usually implemented as a computer program simulating an environment made up of a grid of square cells. Whether or not a cell survives, dies, or is born depends on some simple rules based on the 8 neighbouring cells, which are: if a cell has less than 2 neighbours, it dies of loneliness, I suppose. Cells disappear when they die, by the way. If a cell has 2 or 3 neighbours, it survives. If a cell has more than 3 neighbours, it dies of overcrowding. And if an empty space has exactly 3 neighbours, a new cell is born in that space. And from these simple rules, an initial pattern seeded into the grid can develop and transform in very interesting ways that resemble the growth and spread of simple organisms. Anyway, that's enough about the original. What got me wondering is what would happen if, instead of solid blocks, what if the cells were represented by letters of the alphabet, and the rules were not simple life or death, but also included the possibility of the letter changing to a different letter? Perhaps there could also be weighting in the rules based on subtle things like the general relationships of vowels and consonants, or specific things like the pairing of Q and U, or statistical things like the frequency of letters occurring in English or whatever other language you like. I haven't figured out the detail of these rules, it's just an idea, not its implementation. Perhaps instead of structures like gliders, we might find certain words or patterns have stability, or maybe some interesting stuff might arise, or maybe the rules and weights can be tuned to make that happen on purpose. As far as I can tell, nobody seems to have explored exactly this idea. Next, potatoes as a dessert. Now, this one might need a little bit of prefacing and explanation. Firstly, I would never dream of claiming that all of my ideas are original in all of the world, but everything on this list popped into my head as if it was a new idea to me. I am, of course, aware that potatoes have been used in many a sweet dish. For example, I have a recipe for a Polish cake that's filled with a vanilla custard thickened with potato flour. Lots of sweet things can contain potatoes. And of course, sweet potatoes even more so. However, when I say potatoes as a dessert, I'm talking about the idea of making a dessert dish where it's very obvious that what you're eating is potatoes, but it's still a dessert or sweet dish. One idea for implementation I had would be to take some variety of small, firm potato and cook them in a flavoured sugar syrup, basically candying them in a similar way that the French do with chestnuts to make marron glacé. I don't know if this would work because this idea has only ever existed on my list. Next idea, an umbrella that closes inside out. I feel pretty sure this one's probably been done by now, but this is an idea that happened back when I was commuting to Portsmouth by train every day, rain or shine. In most cases, it was okay and accepted that a wet umbrella would drip some water onto the floor where the tip rests, but a bigger problem was the transfer of water from the folded wet canopy onto my trouser leg or the seat or something else that isn't the already wet floor. So why not make an umbrella that folds inside out? The middle of the canopy is the part that slides down the shaft, and the canopy closes with the wet part inside the fold. Next idea is for the kitchen, adding bones. People debone meat and poultry to make it more convenient to cook and eat, and yet I think it's true that most cooks recognise meat cooked on the bone can be superior in flavour and texture. So here's the question, what happens if you insert bones into a cut of meat where they don't belong? For example, making a hole through a chicken breast fillet and inserting an uncooked chicken thigh bone before cooking, or maybe even a bone from a different kind of meat such as a pork rib bone, prior to proper cooking, of course. It would be interesting to see what kind of a difference this makes. Maybe it will be amazing, maybe terrible, or maybe just boring. I didn't ever promise these ideas would be good ideas. The next idea is called Colour Hunter app. This is probably a bit silly and basic, but I was thinking of an app on a mobile phone that would present the end user with a randomised target colour. And you'd have to go scouting with the camera in the real world to find an object that is an exact match, or I suppose a close enough match within some sort of parameters at the start of the game, maybe getting harder so you have to get a closer match as the game develops. Next one, square balloons. I think it should be possible to make balloons out of ordinary latex rubber that, when fully inflated, are cubic in shape. Here's my reasoning. An ordinary round balloon is almost entirely convex in both of its surface dimensions, which is what we should expect for a flexible membrane with a higher pressure inside than outside. However, with balloons that are formed over a specifically shaped mould, like these that are supposed to be cats and mice, there are surfaces that are concave in one direction, albeit whilst being convex in the other direction across their surface. And it's possible to make balloons that have conical lumps on them, like this one here. In fact, you could think of the stalk end of a standard balloon as a conical lump. And it's possible to constrain parts of balloons from being inflated so much by using slightly thicker rubber for that section. So I believe that adding all of these design factors together, it should be possible to engineer a balloon that inflates to something approximating a cube. I suppose another way to think about this is, what if we start with a round balloon and make whatever changes are necessary to add 4 equally spaced pointy bumps at the top and another 4 corresponding lumps at the bottom. By adjusting the properties of the rubber, it should be possible to make the points more or less pointy and their sides more or less curved, until we end up with something that's sort of nearly a cube, to sufficiently vague values of nearly. I don't expect the form for manufacturing this would itself be a cube. It might be something else, and I have no idea how to actually engineer the way in which the latex could be added in such precise amounts and thicknesses. So this is an idea that I was never going to be able to actually make for myself, but there it is. Perhaps someone can find a way to simulate it using soft body physics simulation or something. Next one is a long case clock with a flip clock face. Maybe this has already been done, but this is an idea for a clock that uses a split flap display, but instead of an electronic mechanism behind it, this would be entirely mechanical, pretty much the same thing as a long case or grandfather clock, that is, using a pendulum to keep time and weights or a wound spring for power. But instead of the traditional round clock display with hour, minute and maybe second hands, there would be a numeric display of the current time on mechanical flaps. But there's no reason why the style of these flaps would have to be constrained to the modern style of white modern numerals on plain black plates. It could be more in keeping with the style of the traditional long case clock. So maybe using enamelled or pierced or engraved or plated thin brass sheets to represent the numerals. Another umbrella idea, again inspired by commuting, partly on foot in all weathers. I always found compact folding umbrellas to be pretty useless. Don't get me wrong, an umbrella that folds down into a package the size of a sausage roll is an absolute marvel of engineering, but in my experience they don't stand up well in cases where it's both raining and windy, which frankly is far more likely than raining without wind, at least where I live. I always preferred a cane-style umbrella where the canopy simply folds shut to the shaft, and as an aside, I prefer them with a crook-type handle rather than the golf umbrella type, because it's convenient just to be able to hook the closed umbrella on your arm to free up both hands to fumble with a wallet or ticket or keys or whatever. But in high or gusty winds, even a robust, high-quality cane-style umbrella can be hard to control, partly because if a gust of turbulent wind manages to catch under the edge of the canopy, it can still turn inside out, and because you're holding the handle end of the shaft, but the wind is applying forces at the top end. So what about some sort of guy ropes? Just pieces of cord that tether the edge of the canopy in several places, back to the handle end of the shaft. This, at the very least, should stop the canopy from wobbling and deforming. Of course, it doesn't completely solve the problem that you're basically trying to control a sail in a gale, but I think it might help. Of course, it might, in also some ways, hinder. A more rigidly sound canopy can't deform and spill air out of it, so when it's braced in this way, I suppose it's possible that that gust of wind might tip it over completely and then wrench the whole thing right out of your hand, or pull you over. Maybe it only needs a couple of restraint cords, or maybe just one. Needs testing, and there's probably some good reason why I haven't done the testing myself. Game Blender. This is an idea that spun off from my invention dice, and it's a fairly simple tool for inspiring ideas for making video games. It would be some mechanism, probably just a simple computer program that randomizes theme elements for a game, although it could also be done using paper slips in a bag and some gaming dice. So for example, you might get the following as the output: 50% Tetris, 10% Doom, 30% Pac-Man, 10% Scrabble. These are just examples. It could be any proportions of any number of existing games or genres or themes. So perhaps we could interpret this layer as a game in which, like Tetris, things are falling from the sky and you have to deal with them somehow. But, like Doom, you're actually inside the 3D environment where the blocks are falling. The Pac-Man element might inspire some sort of power-ups and or enemies, and the Scrabble element, I don't know, maybe the way you have to deal with arranging the blocks needs to be more specific than just stacking them neatly. Maybe there needs to be some valid order or sequence. Maybe stacking the blocks in the right way is the thing that creates the power-ups, and stacking them the wrong way is the thing that creates the enemies. With any randomizing tool like this, the trick is to be inspired by the juxtaposition of the different things rather than constrained by them. Even if you get elements that seem like they're in direct opposition or conflict with each other, allow that tension to stimulate ideas rather than stifling them. And finally, a want site for charity shops. I know that some charity shop organisations have accounts to sell stuff on eBay, and that's great, but the problem with sites like eBay is you can only buy what's already listed there. And as a seller, if you have a ton of different stuff to sell, your limited time means you'll typically only list the items that you feel are likely to sell. Wouldn't it be great if there was a site where people could specify what it is they're looking for? I'm thinking China tableware and ornaments might be the ideal initial category. So people looking for more of a specific pattern of plates or cups might be able to upload a photo of what they already have. Maybe some clever image processing could classify it. And a similar process could happen at the charity shop end. So rather than the sellers laboriously looking through all of the want ads, they could just upload a bunch of photos or videos of their shelves. Image processing techniques already exist to recognize and filter out potential matches. They might need verifying by a human, and of course there's always the possibility that matched thing gets sold in the physical store moments after taking the photos. But aside from that, there seems potential here to facilitate match transactions in which everyone wins, which wouldn't otherwise happen. The charity gets to sell an item and the customer gets the exact thing they've been searching for. It could even have a geographic angle so that if there's a match in your local area, you'd be able to request for it to be set aside so you can just go and buy it in person to save the hassle and cost and risk of shipping. So there we are. Now you might imagine my list of ideas are now 10 random ideas shorter, but the reality is in writing this script for this video and reviewing the ideas for the list, more stuff just happened in my head that I need to write down somewhere. I hope this has been useful or interesting or something. Thanks for watching. I'd like to wish you a happy, safe and prosperous new year, and I hope to see you again soon.